So, what happens when the very rules of the game, the ones the world has been playing by for decades, are suddenly up for grabs? I mean, think about it. These are the huge questions The Economist is posing as we look ahead to 2025. And believe me, the answers are going to shape all of our lives. All right, let's dive right in. In this explainer, we're going to break down the biggest forecasts from The Economist's The World Ahead 2025 report. We'll use their analysis to piece together a really clear picture of what the coming year might hold. So here's our game plan. We'll kick things off by looking at the big forces reshaping our world. Then we'll get into the potential shockwaves of a second Trump term, explore why technology like AI is at a critical crossroads, see how global powers are scrambling to react, and then we'll wrap it all up with the key things to watch for. First up, a world being reshaped. See, The Economist says 2025 isn't about just one single story. It's actually about the collision of three massive forces: the political tremor of Donald Trump, the warp speed evolution of technology, and the deep, deep uncertainty that both of them are stirring up. And you really got to understand that these aren't just separate issues happening on their own. Nope. Think of them more like overlapping waves in a storm. A political shift in America slams into global trade, which in turn fuels tech competition. It all creates this powerful feedback loop that's really going to define 2025. Okay, so let's get into what the report identifies as the single biggest variable of the year, a potential second Trump presidency. The Economist spends a lot of time trying to figure out what that could actually mean, not just for America, but for the entire world. So how do you cut through all the noise of campaign promises to figure out what's real? Well, the report introduces this really fascinating tool. They call it a MAGA scale of policy plausibility. It's basically a framework designed to separate the pure rhetoric from what is most likely to become actual policy. So here's how it works. At the very top, you've got the dead certs, things like immediate, tough action on immigration. One step down, you have highly likely policies, like extending tax cuts. As you go further down the scale, things get, less probable. You've got broad tariffs, then large-scale deportations, all the way down to things the report considers certain to not happen, like brokering a lasting peace in Ukraine. It's actually a pretty smart way to sort through it all. And this all leads to a really important concept in foreign policy, the deterrence deficit. The idea here is that a more inward-looking America will create this gap, a vacuum really, between the threats out there in the world and the U.S.'s willingness to step in. Now, that is a huge shift from decades of policy, and it's a vacuum that could make rivals bolder and allies a whole lot more nervous. And here's where policy gets very, very real. The report highlights proposed tariffs of 60% on all imports from China and a baseline of 10% on goods from literally everywhere else. Just think about that. A trade policy that aggressive would send massive, cascading shockwaves through the entire global economy. Okay, let's shift gears, moving on from politics to that second dominant force, technology. And specifically, the report projects that 2025 is going to be a make or break year for artificial intelligence. The hype has been, frankly, off the charts, but now it's crunch time. Which brings us to the central question, doesn't it? After all the billions invested and all the breathless headlines about chatbots, is 2025 the year AI finally starts to transform businesses in a way we can actually measure? Or is it the year the bubble bursts? Now get ready for this number because it's pretty staggering. According to The Economist, only about 5% of American businesses say they're actually using AI. 5%. That single number just shows you the enormous gulf between this public idea of an AI revolution and where things are in the real world right now. But hey, it's not all about AI. The report flags some other massive tech milestones for 2025. We're talking about the first commercial-scale fusion reactor getting switched on. We're talking about humans heading back to the moon. And we're talking about AI showing its incredible potential to speed up the creation of new medicines. It's shaping up to be a pretty pivotal year for tech. So, you've got America's role in the world potentially shifting, and technology creating all these new rivalries. How is the rest of the world supposed to react? Well, countries are scrambling to adapt, and that leads to some major power plays. And you can see the ripple effects immediately. That deterrence deficit we talked about, it's forcing a historic and probably uncomfortable rethink in Europe. The continent is waking up to the idea that it might have to take the lead in its own security. As the report puts it so starkly, if Europe wants peace, it has to start planning for war. And these tensions are not just in Europe. Flashpoints like the South China Sea are going to become even more critical tests. You have China's ongoing assertiveness over these disputed waters, and that creates a constant challenge for its neighbors and, of course, for whatever shape American foreign policy takes in 2025. The report also gets super specific with these things they call super forecasts. So, what are the odds of US tariffs on China hitting 15% or more? They say 32%. What about Nvidia's market cap landing somewhere between 4 and 5.5 trillion? A 41% chance. And the winner of Germany's next election? The report gives the Christian Democratic Union a whopping 99% chance. So, let's bring this all together. What does it all mean for the year ahead? Well, The Economist frames 2025 as a year of shocks and sequels, a time when the consequences of things that have already happened really start to hit home, and new, unexpected challenges pop up. When you boil it all down, there are three huge trends to keep your eye on. First, a much sharper turn towards protectionism, especially from the US. Second, a reality check for AI, where all that hype has to finally meet real-world value. And third, a global geopolitical scramble, with every country trying to find its place in a much less predictable world. And that leaves us with this final, really thought-provoking question from the report. In a year filled with big, known trends and the fallout from past events, what's the wild card? What will be the one story, the one event that absolutely nobody sees coming? I guess we'll just have to wait and find out.